just want to say the subject of English, but we don't require them to speak English when they become a legal immigrant here. You know, I lived in a neighborhood that was highly, California, highly, a lot of illegal immigrants, I would imagine. And we were discussing the fact that a lot of people didn't speak English there because they had to have an interpreter in the spring when we had a meeting. And I said, well, do you think about putting Spanish signs up because they park where they're not supposed to park, you know, that they might be able to speak English, but they can't read or write it. So I think that that needs to be a requirement. When you come to this country, you need to learn to speak English. I shouldn't have to learn to speak Spanish and every other language on the planet to talk to you. You came here. I would learn, if I went to Italy, I would learn Italian so I could get along. If I moved to France, I would learn enough French so I could get along.
And if you move to England, learn English.
I just want to say, as we talk about illegal immigrants, let's keep in mind that these are still God's children, and I'm not saying that anybody's saying otherwise. They deserve to be treated with respect. And I want to say that I actually love the diversity that Hispanics bring to this country. Although when we talk about illegal immigration, I want to put an end to the parasites that come here to live off of and mooch off of us. However, and I think I speak for probably a few of us that some of these illegal immigrants have become our friends in our community. We work with them, some of them go to our churches. They deserve to be treated with respect. And again, I'm not saying that anybody's saying that. But regarding language, I really think that's kind of a non-issue. I don't think it's something that the government needs to be getting involved in. You know, I kind of enjoy being able to speak whatever language I want. And quite honestly, I've been overseas, and I know I've lived in communities where lots of other Americans live, and for the most part, most Americans don't get out and try to learn the other language or the culture. The government trying to enforce language and culture and customs, I think that's just something we don't want to get in. That's something we can deal with in other ways rather than government.
And I thank you for that. And to your first comment, I hope I've made clear this is not about legal immigrants or treating anyone with a lack of dignity or respect. I absolutely agree with you. And you're exactly right. We are God's children and need to be treated with respect. I think to your second point with language, I would agree. I think we don't need a law that says only English will be spoken here. But I think it might be a good idea before we see the demographics get too balkanized and broken into groups. That maybe we need a bill that says the official language of governmental functions, if you need social services, is English.
I agree with that. I used to work for a government agency where a large group of Hispanics lived, and the mandate from the government was coming down that we had to put all of our materials out in Spanish. And then the Vietnamese population moved in. We had to spend all this money to get all our stuff in Vietnamese. I agree with that. But the government, I would support an official language bill or act as long as it was restricted to that. But if you look in parts of Canada, Quebec, for instance, they've taken that way too far, and I just want to make sure that we don't take it that far. Where they, as many of you know, in Quebec there's a lot of French-speaking people and a lot of English-speaking people. They've made French the official language, and they say they've even taken it so far that if you own a shop, you have to put the name of the shop or all the word signage in French. And if you put it in English, it has to be underneath it. It has to be a certain font size, a certain fraction smaller than the French. I don't want to see that happen here. And when I hear people talking about an official language, I get scared that it could be taken that far here.
We have a respectful agreement here. We had a comment back here.
Okay, well, I just looks like you already made the point, but I want to say this about the language issue that, you know, as private people in this private businesses, people should be free to use whatever the language they want, put up signs in whatever language they want, talk to whatever kind of people they want, use whatever language they want on their telephone service. That's as private businesses. But for government, there should be English only for government functions.
Nice book.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One of the observations I have is from my experience, because my parents are from Mexico, and the way that they came into the country was legal. This was decades ago. One of the first things my dad did when he came to this country, he was 15 years old when he came to this country, was he learned the language. He said, if you're going to make your way in a new country, you've got to learn the language. When he was stationed in Germany, he learned German so he could get along with the folks over there. As I was growing up, I ran into, I was dating a German girl, and her parents were coming to this country legally. And I got to meet a whole crew of German folks that were very proud to become Americans. They were very proud of the fact that they had a German background, but that they were learning English and they were immersing themselves into the laws, lands, and customs of this country. And they said that is as it should be. One of the other observations I've noticed, though, is that over the years there's been kind of a preferential treatment given to the immigrants. You got the ones like my son-in-law who's trying to immigrate here legally from England, and he's finding it extremely difficult to get through the myriad of laws that there are that seem to want to exclude him. As a person in the UK wanting to become an American, and yet I have found that some of the illegals find it really easy to duck the laws and avoid the issues instead of trying to go through this morass. And I can for folks in general. And I was wondering if there was some way of trying to create an easier immigration process for people that want to come here legally, that are trying to do the right thing. Okay, they want to learn the language, they want to learn the ways and customs of this country, and yet they're, that without the preferentials that we have for certain people, like there seems to be this preference for folks coming from the South. There seems to be certain preferences to folks that are refugees from crimes committed 100 years ago. And this was something I saw in Glendale, California, where you had people that were, because they came from a certain country in Eastern Europe, they were allowed over here as refugee status. They were given gobs of money on the government dime to start up businesses, to buy homes, over the preferences of Americans that actually needed some of these services. But you had these people because, decades ago and generations ago, some supposed genocide was committed against them, and they get the preferences even now. And I was wondering, is it any proposals to kind of simplify this whole thing and say, whoever you are, wherever you are, if you want to come, we have this simplified standards. You learn the history. You go through the same things that immigrants 20 years ago had to go through. They learn the language. They put their hand over their hearts, and they say, I am now an American citizen.
Well, it's an excellent point. And as you well pointed out, there is a strong history of favoring those nations' citizens whom we regard as needing to get here most. The most recent example, I think, is what's going on in Bosnia during the 1990s, and we saw a lot of refugees. So that has driven our policy. But it's a very complex matrix, and if you're from this country, you get preferential treatment. If you're from that one, you don't. My point is, and I'm perfectly willing to examine the whole process, but my point is, we have a process. The first step in fixing what's going on is to enforce the process we have today.
Isn't there still a quota for legal immigration?
There are quotas, and the quotas are allocated by country, so absolutely. But there's no quota